It was supposed to be a momentous morning, one of those when the air seems to vibrate with anxious anticipation, even though nothing foreshadows disaster. Sophia's first trip without me, the very combination seemed too grown up, too sudden for my ears. She was 8, and she was high on orange juice and adrenaline, bouncing comically in place, like a little spring that couldn't sit still. Sophia kept checking her backpack, peering inside again and again, as if afraid it would evaporate, vanish into thin air. There were her headphones, a coloring book with foxes and seagulls, and a small stuffed rabbit with a frayed ear, the very one she categorically refused to give up. Even though I tried to explain that it could get lost on the trip, she stood in the doorway, stubbornly clutching the toy to her chest, and I gave in, like a mother who knows the battle isn't worth dimming the sparkle in a child's eyes. My parents and my sister's family were taking her to Florida, sunshine, theme parks, dolphins, noisy joy, all the things that at her age seem pure magic. I couldn't go. There was no way to ask for time off. Work sucked me in like quicksand, promising a vacation any minute now, but never delivering. So I packed her bag, filled it with her favorite snacks, apple chips, honey-dipped almonds, mini juice boxes, kissed her hair, which still lingered with the scent of raspberry shampoo, and told myself everything would be okay. She was surrounded by family. After all, what could go wrong? And before we go any further, I want to thank you. I'm so glad you're watching this video on my channel. Please let me know in the comments. And what do you think? Does everything in life happen for a reason? At 7:50 a.m., Mom sent me a photo right from the gate. Sophia was smiling, missing a tooth, both thumbs up, and her smile held such triumph, as if she'd already conquered the world. Boarding soon, Mom captioned it. I smiled at the phone, showed the photo to a colleague, and told her that my little girl was heading off on her first adventure. A slight sting of envy stirred in my chest, between my ribs, not a black one, but a tender, almost maternal sadness for myself, for the one who had once been little and was going somewhere for the first time. And then, 2 hours later, as the meeting languished, another message arrived. We all voted for her to stay. I frowned, staring at the screen as someone nearby talked about forecasts and delivery dates, as if the voice was coming from far away, through thick water. Where should I stop? What did it mean? I didn't even take it seriously, a strange, typical joke for my family, cryptic, without context. I put the phone face down and returned to work, telling myself I'd check everything later. I wanted to call then, right away, but I didn't, as always. And by the time I finally realized what the message really meant, my daughter was already sitting at the airport with a stranger, waiting for her mother, who didn't know she'd been abandoned. The rest of the morning dissolved into the familiar noise, emails, conference calls, small tasks filling the space like dust. Sometimes I caught myself opening the photo of Sophia at the gate again, and my heart responded with a slight surge of pride. She was flying across the country, she was brave, she was growing up, and everything was fine with her. By midday, the light in the office had grown dim, like old paper, and I automatically checked my phone. No messages, of course not. They were in the air. Halfway to Florida, I told myself to stop hesitating, because anxiety was a stupid feeling. It didn't help, it only hindered. When I finally left work, the air in the parking lot was hot, smelling of asphalt and gasoline. I unlocked the car, glanced at my phone again, and saw the same unread message staring back at me like a reproach. We all voted for her to stay. For the first time, I felt something strange, a thin, icy tremor beneath my skin. I decided I'd call them right after landing, just to hear her voice, tell them I loved her, and let it all feel like a normal end to a long day. They answered the second call. There was laughter in the background, the clatter of luggage, someone talking about a rental car, and I said, smiling, "Hey, there. You did it. Tell Sophia to come over." A pause, then my mother's voice, light, as if we were discussing the weather. "Didn't you get our message?" "What message?" "The one where we said we voted for her to stay." I laughed, because what else can you do when your brain refuses to accept the obvious? "What does that mean?" I asked, and then my father's voice came back, calm, emotionless. "She was being capricious. We decided it was best for her to stay home." The laughter caught in my throat. You abandoned her?" I whispered. My sister intervened, confident and businesslike as always. "Relax, everything's under control. We called an emergency child care agency. She's fine." My mother added, now more hurriedly, "It's a good agency, 5 stars on Google, we'll send you the name, we have to catch the shuttle, we'll talk later. For a moment, I simply stood in the parking lot, my feet numb, as if the asphalt beneath me had turned into a quicksand, ready to swallow me up, along with my breath, which had become short and shallow, like someone just emerging from the depths. I still held the phone to my ear, listening to the void, devoid of any sound, only the dull beating of my heart, a rhythm like a countdown. Then came a ringing silence, the kind that makes every movement seem unnatural, every decision too late. I called. Again, and again all I heard was a voicemail, lifeless and alien, and then one thought cut through everything else, like a sharp beam in the darkness: my child was alone. After that, I no longer thought, weighed, or planned, I simply began to move. My bag slammed against my hip, my keys jingled in my hand. I didn't know where exactly or why, but I knew I had to keep going until my body chose the path itself. The number came a minute later, a message from my mother's phone, dry, without a greeting, without words, just a link and the name of an agency I'd never heard of before. I clicked it, and the screen filled with faded letters and a logo, as if from another time, like an old website forgotten by everyone. When someone finally answered, the voice on the other end was bored, broken, as if the woman was speaking out of exhaustion rather than concern. "Childcare Support Agency," she said without intonation. I said, "My daughter, she was picked up from the airport by one of your escorts. I need to know where she is." I tried to keep my voice calm and composed, though my hands were shaking so badly I almost slipped the phone. Someone on the other end was typing, the dry click of the keys, and then a short answer: "The child has been picked up, she is safe, a caregiver took her home, where she was supposed to be met." I asked, "What's the address?" And after a pause so long I could hear a bead of sweat or maybe a tear rolled down her cheek, the woman said, "Sending now." A second later, a message appeared with a street I didn't recognize, somewhere halfway across the city. No apology, no explanation, just logistics, as if they were talking about delivering a package and not my daughter. I was driving too fast, unaware that the speedometer needle was crossing the line, and the city was flashing past the windows in blurred lights. The streetlights stretched like threads, smearing across the windshield, and it felt as if the entire space had been stretched into one endless line between me and Sophia. The steering wheel was slippery under my fingers, and every time I blinked, an image flashed before my eyes: my little girl, sitting in a strange car seat, swinging her legs in anticipation, staring at a door where no one appeared. By the time I pulled up to the address, my heart was beating steadily and wildly, like that of a cornered animal. The neighborhood looked tired, the houses dilapidated, wet concrete squelched underfoot, and the lone streetlight flickered, as if unsure whether it should continue to shine. Before I could knock, the door opened, and a woman with a tired face appeared, immediately telling me she didn't like me. "Are you the mother?" she asked, and the question held more reproach than curiosity. "Yes," I breathed out. She snorted, like someone who had seen too much. "You have such nerve," she said. "She's been here all day." Then she called over her shoulder, "Baby, you've got a ride." The interior smelled of disinfectant and something microwaved, a mixture that left my throat dry. Sophia was sitting on the couch, small, huddled in a corner, her backpack neatly beside her, and that very rabbit, her faithful companion, on her lap. Her eyes were huge and unmoving, and when she saw me, she jumped up and ran, straight toward me, so fast that I caught her halfway, nearly knocking us both over. She hugged me around the neck, hot and trembling, and whispered, "I did well, Mommy." I waited. I held her tightly, feeling my own body finally remember how to breathe. "You did everything right," I said, swallowing back tears. "Nobody gave me your number," Sophia said quietly as I picked her up. "I called the number they left, but it kept saying it wasn't available." A nurse lingered at the door, a woman of about 40, in a gray robe, with eyes that held too much indifference. "Nobody gave me your number," she repeated, almost word for word, only hoarsely now, as if making excuses. "I called the number they left for me. It always went to a voicemail saying the number couldn't answer. I tried 3 times, I answered quietly, almost soundlessly, that was my mother's number." Then I added, "Thank you for staying." She shrugged, as if it didn't matter. "I'll send the bill," she said, and closed the door. We left quickly, like people running from a place where the air can no longer be breathed. Sophia held my hand the whole way to the car, her fingers cold, as if she'd just pulled them out of water. The night smelled of rain and jet fuel, a distant, unsettling scent, reminiscent of a lost flight. She sat in the passenger seat and held my hand, as if it were an anchor holding her to this world. We drove in silence, listening to the hum of the tires and her uneven breathing, and the silence between us wasn't emptiness, but a heavy bond that needed no words. At home, Sophia fell asleep right on the couch, still wearing her sneakers, and I leaned over, untied her laces, covered her with a blanket, and sat next to her. In the light of the table lamp, her face looked so small again, almost baby-like, her hair disheveled across the pillow, her bunny tucked under her chin. The phone screen glowed on the table, and that same message was still there. We all voted for her to stay. I stared at those words until they began to blur, turning into meaningless symbols. They thought that by leaving her, they could simply forget about their decision, like forgetting to close the window when leaving the house. They were wrong. In a week, they would understand what it meant to be left behind, not in the physical sense, but in that special, internal sense when you suddenly realize the train has left without you, and no excuses can restore the former balance. I'd like to say that everything that happened at the airport was an accident, a whim of circumstances, an explosion that arose out of nowhere, but no, it was a loud echo of something ancient, building up over the years, slowly, inexorably, like water seeping through the cracks of a family wall. If you grow up in a family like mine, you learn one thing early: justice is just a myth, a beautiful fairy tale that adults stop believing in once they realize love isn't air, but a scarce resource. I've always been responsible. That's how they talked about me, that's how they represented me, that's how they judged me. My sister, Adele, is sensitive. It sounded almost like a diagnosis, but in reality, it was a password that concealed a system of distribution. I clean, she gets applause. When we were kids, I'd sit at the kitchen table, solving math problems and writing essays, while Adele drew flowers and suns on the walls with colored pencils. Guess who got punished when Mom walked in and saw the mess? Hint, not the artist. Mom said I should be a role model, because Adele was fragile, a delicate soul, and Dad, as always, remained silent. And in our family, Dad's silence meant consent. By the age of 10, I could make soup, wash bed linens, iron, cook dinner, and guess my mother's mood by the sounds she made in the kitchen 3 rooms away. Adele, at 7, still couldn't pour herself milk, but she knew perfectly well how to get what she wanted. She cried quietly, skillfully, with silent tears, and my mother would immediately soften, then call me to apologize for anything, just to keep the peace. I learned this rule before I could write capital letters. Love is a limited commodity, and my sister's premium subscription never expires. In high school, I stopped expecting anyone to notice me unless something catastrophic happened. I became efficient, unnoticeable, convenient, like the air that's always there, but no one thanks for its presence. The teachers adored me. My mother said I was reliable, which in her language meant boring. When the time came to leave for school, I had no choice: either leave, or remain in their circle forever, pretending not to notice how they were using me. My parents didn't give me a penny, only advice, expensive and unnecessary. Don't be too ambitious, my mother said. Men don't like women who outshine them, and, of course, it was then that ambition was born within me, not stubborn, but quiet, disciplined, like an inner spring. I received a scholarship, worked 2 jobs, ate noodles from a bag, and studied hard, a top student, proud of her survival. Meanwhile, Adele was searching for herself, in bars that didn't accept cards and with men who were willing to pay cash. She studied art, then psychology, then undecided, and finally gave it all up to marry Ryan, a freelancer who still lists his profession, but no one knows he's actually freelancing. When I graduated, my mother looked at me as if I'd dared to become someone. Do you think you're better than everyone now? She asked. I didn't answer, too tired of climbing a ladder she pretended she didn't know existed. Years passed. I had a job, albeit not ideal, but stable, a mortgage, a husband who did his own laundry, and a routine where everything happened. Adele had 2 children, mountains of debt, and the ability to turn any crisis into a collective drama that required the participation of the entire family. Every time her rent was late or her car broke down, I'd hear her voice on the phone. I feel awkward asking. And I already knew she wasn't awkward at all. Once, Tommaso, my husband, said I couldn't say no, and he was probably right. My mother liked to remind me, you earn more than anyone, darling, it's no problem for you. For them, no, but for me, It was always, at first, it was small amounts, birthday gifts, help for a week, but then came family trips where I'd pay for everyone, make reservations, and then hear Adele laugh, "But you're so generous." I'd call it polite blackmail, with a smile, but without a choice. And then came the house, Tommaso and I, our first real home, a sensible purchase, grown up, hard one. We hadn't even finished painting the kitchen when Adele arrived, in tears, telling me about the landlord who'd broken the lease, just for a few months, she pleaded, but I knew her few months could survive a nuclear winter. She paid only a quarter of what she'd promised, then complained to my mom. And soon a post appeared on her Facebook feed about how greedy people don't understand what a real family is. Guess who was greedy? Hint, not the tenant. Every time I even mentioned money, how it was time to return at least some of the rent, Adele, as if on schedule, would suffer another catastrophe, a staggering dental bill, the theft of her laptop, which she claimed she was going to use to start a new project, or the loss of a job I'd long suspected she never had. And every time, Mom took her side, uttering her favorite phrase, "She's trying. She's doing everything she can." I did the same, only, apparently, in the wrong direction. My efforts were wasted, like water trying to fill a sieve. The only time I tried to set boundaries, to say a firm no, Mom looked at me with cold reproach and said, "You put money before family." I wanted to reply that my family had long ago put me below money, but I bit my tongue in time. Sarcasm, I realized, is useless against people lacking self-reflection. Then came that trip to Florida, intended as a gesture of reconciliation. My olive branch extended across an ocean of fatigue, Adele said. The kids would love it, we all would love it, but flying is crazy. I'd long ago learned to translate her into human language. Pay, and we'll go. I was drowning in work, endless deadlines, a never-ending stream of emails that filled my nights and weekends. So when she suggested taking Sophia with me, I thought it was the answer. Sun and sea for the child, a week of peace for me. I bought the tickets, paid for the hotel, even ordered matching t-shirts with the slogan "Family is Forever" because Adele insisted. For the photos, it's important. For her photos, of course, my mother thanked me with the intonation of a priest accepting a sacrifice, as if I were giving not money but a part of my own body. Adele, smiling, said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of her as if she were our own." They took everything, my savings, my daughter, and my peace of mind, and managed to lose it all before noon on the first day of vacation. Looking back now, I realize I shouldn't have been surprised. It was just another act in the same play we'd been putting on for years, only now the music was louder. All those years, I'd been their safety net, a cushion for their mistakes, a walking apology for their failings, a pillar no one noticed until it was time to lean on. They'd taught me to believe that rejection was cruel, that no was a sign of unlovingness, and I believed it. But everything changed that evening, when I stood in that small apartment, clutching Sophia to me, and she sobbed into my neck, her whole body shaking, as if a fragile vessel had burst inside her. It wasn't just childhood grief, it was recognition, that terrible moment when a child first feels unwanted. "Why didn't Grandma want me?" she whispered, looking at me with eyes too mature for her age, and that phrase pierced deeper than any reproach. I hugged her tighter, feeling my heart burn from within. "She doesn't know how to be good, darling," I said quietly, almost in a whisper, afraid the loudness would dull the words. "It's not your fault." Sophia nodded, and that nod, small, cautious, was more terrifying than any cry, because it held an understanding, a resignation foreign to a child. When she finally fell asleep, her breathing became even and warm, and I lay beside her, staring at the ceiling and counting her heartbeats, as if counting down the time until some inner decision. By morning, it had taken shape, though I hadn't yet spoken it out loud. When I woke up, the house was strangely quiet. The coffee had burned on the hot plate, leaving a bitter smell in the air. A ray of sunlight, breaking through the curtain, fell directly on a stack of unopened letters. A silent reproach. Sophia's stuffed rabbit, missing one ear, sat on the kitchen counter next to my phone, quietly blinking notifications. I scrolled through them until I reached the last message from my parents. "We all voted for her to stay," Mom wrote. Every time I reread that message, it sounded less like a family decision than a challenge, almost a mocking note, written with the smug confidence that I, as always, would remain silent and swallow it. Tommaso was away, and the house seemed especially empty, only the hum of silence and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. no one to say, wait, cool down, and perhaps that was precisely what gave me the strength not to wait. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and started digging through emails, old correspondence, bank statements, leases, all that boring, dry stuff that held years of my humility, carefully wrapped in a semblance of prudence. Every number, every signature, every detail seemed to whisper, "You owe me nothing," but somehow, in reality, it meant something completely different. "You owe us everything." When a new notification appeared, I was no longer surprised. Another bill, Florida Resort, room service, in my name. They had indeed ordered a margarita on my card. I stared at the screen in disbelief, then laughed, shortly, intermittently, so that the laughter turned into something brittle, almost threatening, like glass about to crack. Fine, if they want numbers, I'll give them numbers. If they measure love in sums, I'll send a bill that can only be cashed by conscience. By the time the coffee had cooled, I'd already opened everything: spreadsheets, contracts, screenshots, neatly arranged across the screens like evidence of a crime no one wanted to talk about. 36 months of temporary discounts on rent, $54,000 they never paid, $3,500 for the vacation I never took, $1,200 for emergency childcare I never approved, $58,700. I stared at that number, but it didn't represent money. It was the equivalent of something else, the arithmetic of disrespect, the balance of how long I'd allowed myself to be written off. It was not only quantifiable but also palpable, almost tangible, like the smell of old coffee, bitter and sticky. I called a lawyer I knew, a friend of Tommaso's, a calm, impeccably polite man who spoke in a voice like someone constantly ironing a silk tie. He responded immediately. I said, "I don't need therapy, I need a demand letter." He paused, then exhaled, "No emotion, just the facts, Diana, pure, professional, flawless." I saved emotion for other occasions. Professionalism, that's where I excelled. I started with the heading, outstanding balance, 2 words, polite as a slap. I enclosed everything: the lease agreement, screenshots, bank transfers, correspondence where Adele once again promised to make it up to me, receipts for Florida, a printout of Sophia's care. Every line in that letter was a receipt for my patient nature. For the years I let them take and take, they always pretended that freedom meant being debt-free, but their version of freedom always meant someone else paying for it. When the letter was finished, I read it 3 times. There were no threats or accusations, only numbers, dates, and consequences. The tone was perfectly even, but within that evenness, there was a steely edge. I knew how to use that tone. By sending it, I wasn't just sending documents, I was setting in motion a process in which every word would carry weight, every action a price. I copied my parents, because secrets, that's how they win. Their power has always resided in what no one said out loud, but now I decided otherwise. As the cursor hovered over the send button, my hands trembled slightly, not from doubt, from pure, flawless adrenaline. Click, a small sound, but it sounded like the finale of a symphony, like applause no one but me could hear. The kitchen was still brightly lit by the screen. Sophia sat at the other end of the table. She was hunched over, drawing, seriously, intently, her tongue hanging out, the way she always did when she wanted something perfect. A rabbit gradually appeared on the page, big ears, a backpack, a raised paw, as if waving at someone. I moved closer and asked, "What is he doing?" Sophia answered without looking up, "He's going home." She blushed with effort, adding too much blue, the way children always do when they want to make the sky more beautiful than it actually is. I looked at her and suddenly felt the trembling leave my hands. "Smart bunny," I said. She smiled proudly, not looking up from the drawing. "He's not afraid anymore," she added, as if she knew she was talking about more than just him. I nodded, feeling the words stick in my throat, not from pain, but from something new, from clarity, heavy and quiet. I wasn't afraid anymore either. The day after I hit send, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree, the screen flashed with names, and for a second I even thought I'd accidentally won the jackpot at some celestial casino. So many pop-up notifications, so many sounds: group video call, mom, dad, Adele. They were still in Florida, palm trees swaying against their faces, drinks shimmering under tiny paper umbrellas. It was as if I'd intruded on a commercial about a carefree life, a backdrop against which any outrage automatically seemed ridiculous. Mom started talking before the picture cleared. Her voice was sharp, like the crack of a rapper. "Okay, what's that supposed to mean?" she asked, and at that very moment, Adele burst out laughing so hard she nearly spilled her drink all over her swimsuit. "The bill? Seriously?" she breathed. "Really, 58,700? Are you kidding?" Dad, sitting nearby in the shadows, chuckled, as if this was all part of a familiar family play. "She's bluffing," he said calmly. "She wants us to feel guilty, as always. She should have called instead of causing a circus." I remained silent. Sometimes silence works better than any words. Mom leaned closer to the camera, her face filling the screen, her skin glistening with sun and irritation. "You know we don't have that kind of money," she said almost tenderly. "You earn 5 times more than us. How could you even send something like that? Were you trying to humiliate us?" Adele snorted, tucking her hair behind her ear, as if she were on a talk show. "Saint Diana," she said, "is trying to show everyone how righteous she is again. What next? The air bill? The relationship bill?" I answered quietly, almost calmly, and the words rang even louder. "It's not guilt, it's math." They exchanged glances, and for a second their smiles wavered, like bad Wi-Fi losing its signal. Mom blinked and tried to regain control. "Come on, you can't be serious, can you?" she asked. "I'm serious," I said, my voice cool and even, as if polished. Adele gave a nervous smile, no longer laughing, but clicking. "Do you really think you can take money from a family? What kind of person does that?" she blurted out. "The one," I replied, "who won't forget you left my child at the airport." Silence fell instantly, even the wind seemed to die down, and the lapping of water in their pool suddenly ceased to exist. Mom tried to speak first, but her voice no longer held a commanding tone. "You shouldn't do that. Family members don't talk to each other like strangers." "Exactly," I said. Adele's voice rose, thin and trembling like a string. "You're exploiting us," she blurted out. "Then stop being exploited," I replied. They all started talking at once, 3 voices, 3 waves of panic, intertwining into a roar of accusations. Mom complained that I was killing the family, Dad demanded respect, Adele sobbed as if I'd taken a toy from her. I simply waited. When they ran out of words, I said briefly, 10 working days, and ended the call. Click, my screen went black, and my face was reflected in it, calm, motionless, almost bored. The silence that followed felt not like emptiness, but like strength. The guilt parade began even before breakfast. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, messages full of false alarm. Mom wrote, "We're worried about you. This isn't like you." Adele, curtly and venomously, said, "Take that back before you regret it." I ignored it all. I printed the letter again, folded it neatly into an envelope, and mailed the paper copy. If they thought it was a bluff, they should wait for the courier to bring confirmation with tracking information. In the morning, when they were supposed to be home, my doorbell rang like an alarm, 3 sharp beeps, insistent, like someone tapping out a rhythm in Morse code. I opened the door. Mom was in front, Dad slightly behind, Adele clutching the phone so tightly, as if about to record an exorcism. Mom smiled, the same smile she gave waiters when she wanted to appear magnanimous. "Honey, it's just a misunderstanding," she began. "No, it's not a misunderstanding," I said. Adele rolled her eyes, glancing at her father, and I saw her fingers whiten under her manicured nails. "You're just mad at Sophia," she said. "Don't ruin the family over this." "You did it at the airport," I said, keeping my voice low. It was a blow. The air seemed to be sucked out of the room. Adele's mouth opened, then closed, and stayed there, half open, devoid of words. Mom tried again, but more quietly, with an almost pleading tone in her voice. "You've changed." "Okay," I replied. Dad sighed, looking somewhere at the floor. "Maybe we can talk about this at home," he suggested, still relying on his old habit of defusing conflicts with gentleness. "I'm fine here," I said. The mask finally slipped from Mom's face. "You're turning your back on your own parents," she blurted. I nodded. "You abandoned my daughter," I said quietly. "I guess we're even now." The silence that followed was so thick and viscous that it felt like you could touch it, or hang it on the wall, like a heavy family heirloom that no one wanted, yet for some reason everyone cherished. Mom's lips trembled, like someone about to say something irrevocable but too accustomed to power to allow themselves to remain silent. "You'll regret this," she said, and her voice held more weariness than threat. "Maybe," I replied calmly, "but at least I'll regret it in my own home," and I closed the door. The click of the lock sounded better than any applause, short, decisive, with a hint of release. The smear campaign began that very night. As soon as they got Wi-Fi, Adele posted a photo of a cocktail, pink, with a lime wedge, too bright for the evening light, and captioned it, "Money changes people." A few minutes later, my mother commented, "Proud of you for maintaining grace despite the pain, Grace." This from a woman who once burst into tears at the grocery store because they ran out of her favorite cheap rose. By morning, my cousins were texting me, asking, "Are you really suing the family?" As if the very idea of boundaries was an insult. I didn't respond. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. He called back an hour later, his voice dry and calm, like a doctor informing him that the surgery was a success but the patient will have to learn to walk again. "You have an interesting family," he said with a slight grin. "You have no idea," I replied. He suggested a gentle approach, gently, but with a granate effect, as he put it. I agreed. I drew up a formal defamation notice, attached screenshots, a copy of the agreement, and added a reminder that public statements online can easily become evidence if necessary. The posts disappeared by evening, vanished as if they had never been there. In their place, new ones appeared, with the same photo, but under a different caption. "Sorry for the misunderstanding, everything is fine." Even their emojis looked guilty. But all of this was just the beginning, the first move in a long, tedious game of chess, where they tried to play queens but moved like pawns. For weeks, they stubbornly insisted they wouldn't pay, that they didn't have to, that it was all misunderstood, that real families don't send bills. My lawyer didn't blink. He sent another letter, dry, cold, without a single unnecessary word. It was written in the language of consequences, not emotion. It contained numbers, dates, signatures. He attached the original lease agreement with Adele's signature neatly placed beneath the clause regarding monthly payments, and bank statements demonstrating how little she had actually paid over 3 years. He included copies of messages in which they themselves asked me to pay for the trip to Florida because we're taking Sophia, which means it's a shared family expense, and screenshots proving that Sophia never boarded the plane. Every document now had its own label, like little tombstones, for each favor they'd once called an act of love. At the end of the letter was a neat footnote, a legally sounding phrasing of leaving a minor child unattended. Even in official language, the phrase sounded like the crack of a whip. After that, their threatening messages stopped, the whispers began. A few days later, Mom called again, her voice trembled, as if caught between fear and hurt. "Do you really want all this to become public knowledge?" she asked. I looked out the window, where streaks of clouds stretched beyond the horizon, and replied, "You abandoned my daughter at the airport. For me, this has long been public knowledge." She hung up without saying goodbye. 2 weeks passed. During that time, I almost stopped thinking about them, though the silence that followed wasn't peace, but an echo, a ringing that won't leave my head. Then one evening, my lawyer forwarded me an email. The subject line read, "Agreement accepted." I opened the file. Everything looked impeccable. The amounts, the signatures, the legal language, a large down payment, the remainder, in installments, with interest, everything certified and signed. Tommaso stood nearby, reading over my shoulder. When I reached the end, he chuckled. "You seem upset." "No," I said, "I'm just surprised it took so long." He laughed, warmly, without judgment. "You're terrible." "Efficient," I corrected. "The terribleness is just a side effect." I poured myself a coffee, looked at the screen where the words "Final Agreement" still flickered in the upper corner, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the air in the room lighten, not because I'd won, but because, it seemed, the oxygen had finally returned. The room felt new, as if it belonged to me, by right, without reservation, without debt. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, and Sophia, focused and serious, drew next to me, her tongue hanging out slightly, as she always does when she's trying to keep her lines from shaking. Another rabbit, this one wearing sunglasses and carrying a tiny suitcase on wheels. "Where is he going?" I asked, leaning closer to see the words on his suitcase, carefully scrawled in a childish hand. "On the road." Sophia looked up at me and, smiling, answered simply, "Wherever he wants." I smiled too. "Smart rabbit," I said quietly. There was a silence in the house, a real silence, not guarded, not ringing, like before, when every minute waiting for a call from Mom or Adele felt like stepping on glass. This silence was soft, like the morning light, when you first realize no one is watching. Waiting for you to make a mistake, not calling out reproachfully. Outside, a plane passed slowly, lazily, so low that the windows shook, but the sound wasn't harsh, but rather muffled, lulling. Sophia didn't look up, continuing to paint the suitcase bright yellow, and I didn't look away. I thought about everything: the call that ended my familiar role as rescuer, the closed door, the letters, the lawyers, the numbers transformed into boundaries, and about all this strange, unfamiliar silence, which was neither triumph nor revenge, but something much deeper. Steadfastness. They left her, I left them, and this time, no one monitored, recorded, or argued. 3 months have passed since the agreement was signed. Payments are coming precisely on schedule, automatically, politely, without unnecessary words, as if it were all just accounting, devoid of drama. Every 30 days, a short email notification, funds received, and the amount that once brought tears and screams is now simply a number, neutral and precise. These automatic transfers bring more satisfaction than any apology, because they are proof, compensation, recognition, order. I don't even check my balance anymore. I just smile, close the tab, and go about my business. My rental property is no longer a sardonic family nickname, but a real source of income, real tenants, real contracts, real money. Tommaso jokes that the house is finally working for itself. I laugh, replying that he might be the only family member who has done so. I've stopped being the family bank, the freak consultant, the late-night lifeline. I'm just the landlord now. It's funny, but it was in this coolness, this practicality, that I first felt peace. With such a stable income, we've both slowed down a bit. Tommaso still works in tech, with his usual focus and quiet humor, and I've finally allowed myself to work without the constant overtime, without the feeling that every minute must be justified. The evenings truly belong to us now. We dine together, laugh, sometimes just sit in silence, and that's the best music possible. Sophia has become calmer. Her sleep is no longer troubled, and I've started laughing more often myself, though mine is still a little rusty, as if unaccustomed to freedom. Of course, rumors spread. There's always someone in the family who will whisper news of someone else's downfall. According to my cousin, Adele and her husband now have jobs, real ones. She's an administrator at a dental clinic, he handles deliveries. They say they assure everyone it's temporary, that they're restructuring. But in those same conversations they complain about fatigue and lack of time. Welcome to the club, I think. Mom hasn't called, not once. It seems she's finally realized that silence is cheaper than arguments. Life has become quieter, easier, more orderly. I opened a separate account where I transfer the rental income. The tag, visible only to me, reads, College Fund/Therapy Fund/Emergency Chocolate Fund. Tommaso laughs, calling it peace dividends, and perhaps he's right. Peace really can be capitalized on if we stop rescuing those who are drowning out of habit, not need. Now we're doing well, even, perhaps, better than just well. Sometimes in the evenings, the three of us sit on the porch, Sophia between us, barefoot, a blanket over our shoulders, and watch the planes cut through the sky above the rooftops. She still draws her rabbits, with suitcases, with scarves, with maps and tickets, but they always come home, always. I look at her and realize that maybe that was the whole point, not victory, not forgiveness, but one day letting go of everything except what's truly yours. Well, that's it. Do you think I've gone too far? Or perhaps, on the contrary, not far enough? Write if you want. For now, just imagine a rabbit in glasses walking along the runway. He goes wherever he wants, and so do I.